Coming up on this episode of the Mario Rosenstock podcast.
When I was coming up, journalism was never seen as a profession. It was a trade. And it was a somewhat dishonourable trade.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and it was seen as being a trade for malcontents.
Bowsies.
And alcos.
Troublemakers.
As it should be. And I still, maybe I'm blowing smoke up my own arse, but I still like to see myself as a bowsie, a troublemaker, you know. And it's my job to afflict the comfortable.
Ian O'Doherty has been a very regular fixture on Irish TV and radio and in print for years now. His columns in the Irish Independent have always attracted a lot of attention because they often challenge accepted truths and give voice to the so-called unpopular opinions of our day. In fact, he sees doing this as an essential part of his role as a journalist. Ian has just launched his own podcast called The State of Us. More on that in a few minutes. But with all that's happening in the world right now, I thought it was a very apt time to catch up with Ian here on the Mario Rosenstock podcast and have a chat with someone who often takes a very interesting and often controversial position on the big issues we're hearing about in mainstream media. We also talk about Ian's background, his personality, what got him into journalism in the first place, and why he's so passionate about what he does.
This lady lives in a very leafy part of Dublin 4. She went up to Crumlin for the first time. She came back a few hours later. It was like she'd been sent to the projects in Baltimore. She came out with this classic line. My God, it's no wonder they're shooting each other. How do they live like this?
Right. Okay. Yeah.
And I erupted. It woke something in me. This sort of dormant working class warrior kind of thing. I'm a proud and unashamed supporter of the State of Israel.
Right.
I make no apologies. Anybody who's ever been there and then, most importantly, been to the surrounding countries will see the difference. That is not a popular position to hold.
No, it's not.
In the Irish media.
No, it's not.
And the thing is, I don't care. I love my job. I love being a journalist. I get off on it. You know, I'm a romantic. I'm old school. I'm very romantic about journalism. I still think I can change the world.
Mm-hmm.
I still think we can change the world.
My full chat with Ian O'Doherty coming up in just a few minutes' time. But first, when the word got out that a controversialist, opinion maker and columnist was going to be on my special guest on this episode, the Mario Rosenstock hotline it just exploded. Hi, you've reached the Mario Rosenstock podcast. Please leave a message.
Good afternoon, Mario. This is, in a sense, Fintan O'Toole. Interesting that Ian O'Doherty and I both come from the same part of Dublin, the Crumlin, and we're also extremely controversial opinion writers that get the country talking. He for the Independent, I for the far superior Irish Times. For example, in my next column, I will be stating unapologetically that, contrary to popular opinion, I believe that Der Richternacht is not actually one of Klaus von Furstenberg's most compelling works. The construction of the stanzas is staid and, quite frankly, unbecoming of a pensman of that era. There, I've said it, and I'm quite ready for the national backlash that will ensue upon publication, but that I will bat off with ridiculous intellectual ease.
Hi, message for Ian O'Doherty from Brendan O'Connor. Brendan, would you like to come on my show this Saturday? Now that Mario has you all warmed up, but come here. Between me and you, we'll have to tone down anything that might veer away from what official Ireland might like to hear upstairs or anything, you know, so let's see, like the stuff you've been saying about Israel and Gaza, can we steer away from that? See the trans community and freedom of speech, don't touch that. Religion, pretty much anything you've ever written about, actually. We'll have to leave that bit out of the interview. Maybe we'll just, I don't know. Do you want to talk about football? Or COVID? Even better, COVID.
This is Ivan Yates.
And Matt Cooper.
Who does Ian O'Doherty think he is, Matt?
Jonathan.
With his controversial opinions making waves with his media appearances. It's all just a stupid attempt to get attention for himself.
That's all he wants.
Only room for one of those on the Irish airwaves, Matt.
Carl Thomas?
No.
John Gibbons?
No.
The Monk?
No.
Who?
Shut up, Matt.
Oh,
anyway,
me?
Ian, give me a call. I think you and I could make a great men's shed down and dirty podcast together.
Who is it, Ivan?
and exclusive comedy every week on the Mario Rosenstock podcast. And you can get in touch with me personally, mariorosenstock@gmail.com. Whatever you require, if you want to suggest a guest that I might have on, if you want to criticise my podcast, constructive criticism is always welcome. Or if you want to just simply shower me with compliments, I'm always available to hear those as well. Please tell one other person about this podcast if you can, and subscribe and follow. It wouldn't be here without our great sponsor, our generous, fantastic sponsor, Deluxe Bathrooms, Ireland's premium bathroom and tile retailer. If you're dreaming of a bathroom that combines luxury, functionality and style, they have got you covered, and at great prices too. You can get up to 70% off, and the June Summer Sizzler sale is currently on. This has been advertised all over the radio. I've seen it everywhere, all over the media, and it runs till June 29th. The Summer Sizzler sale, Deluxe Bathrooms. You'll find them in Little Island in Cork or Dundalk Retail Park, or online at deluxebathrooms.ie. Save up to 70% store-wide. Okay, let's get down to the main event. Ian O'Doherty, standing by and raring to go over in the GoLoud studios, and he's getting very used to podcast studios now that he has just launched his own. So let's kick it off there. Ian, so thanks for joining me on the podcast. I mean, you're obviously well known to even a lot of my listeners from your columns in the Irish Independent. But now you're giving podcasting a go as well, yeah?
I am. Move or die.
Is that what it's called?
No, it's actually, that would have been a better name. No, it's called The State of Us. And I was thinking of calling it The State of Us with Ian O'Doherty, and I thought, nah, that's probably pushing the ego bit a bit too far. So just keep it with The State.
So The State of Us is obviously a little satirical. So The State of Us, but it's also STATE. So I suppose it's talking about the state as well in a bit. And the state
exactly. It can be. It's a play in that old Dublin thing. Oh, Jesus, the stadia. Right, and then there is actually the broader question of the state of us. Where do we stand? Where are we at as a state?
And so far, you said outside to me, you've had about 6 guests.
About 6.
And judging by the names you were mentioning to me, there is a bent on the podcast to attract names which maybe would attract some controversy. Yeah.
Well, I want interesting people.
Cool, please,
a perfect example is the first guest I had on was Graham Linehan.
Yeah, of Father Ted fame.
And later of the sort of gender war infamy.
And Gamergate as well before that.
And that's kind of in the past. At the moment, though, he went from being one of the most beloved Irish characters because of Father Ted, to being one of the most reviled people, not just in Ireland, but in Britain. And he had his life systematically destroyed. I mean, we talk about cancel culture. This guy had everything taken off him, right? Even down to having to take his name off the rights for the Father Ted musical.
Yes.
Right? He was treated abominably. And what I found... I
think he was told that the Father Ted musical will never happen with his name associated with it.
Yes, although I do have a little bit of exclusive for you coming up about that later on, which I've been keeping for you.
Thank you.
But so the reason why I wanted Graham on was me and Graham have known each other since we were kids in Hot Press. And we always really disliked each other, right? We never got on. He was 19, I was 16 when I started doing stuff for Hot Press. And we had different tastes in music, and we were just very, very different people. But because we had a similar circle of friends, as we got older, you'd be meeting at 21sts, or you'd be meeting then at weddings or christenings and things. The various different landmarks of life that we all go through. And we'd always just snarl at each other. And I'd have friends saying to me, like, would you not just, who were mutual friends. And it used to be kind of awkward for them because we couldn't really be in the same table together because we just started having a go with each other. And we just genuinely really did not like each other. And I saw what was happening to him when he stuck his toe into the
trans debate.
The trans debate, and it's like a simmering pit of lava, that most people are staying
Before we go on with that, just because it went on for so long, it's been going on for so long, and I'm on the outside, so I'll just try and see if I'm interpreting it right.
Graham's position is that he is standing up for what he might regard the rights of women, in the sense that he would viscerally object to the idea of biologically born men, let's say, sharing dressing rooms with biological women.
Prison cells.
Or prison cells. Am I right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, so this was his view, and he got into an awful lot of trouble.
Well, you see, Graham, and he won't thank me for saying this, but he won't blame me either. Graham is a very blunt individual. For all his undoubted skills as a comedy writer, as a person, subtlety is not his strong point. And so what Graham thinks, Graham says. And in the waters that Graham swims in, you have to couch your words quite carefully. And Graham says what he means, and he means what he says. He's a very blunt man, which is probably one of the reasons why we didn't get on quite well, because he didn't like a review that I'd written, and I in Hot Press, and I got the hump with him. You know,
well, maybe you're quite blunt as well, so maybe two blunts didn't cancelled each other out. Funny
enough, a few people have said that, and a couple of people said to me, "Oh, well, the two of you are very similar." I go, "No, we're nothing the same. How dare you?" And then myself and Graham, when we kind of got back on together, a few people used to say to him, "Was like, well, yourself and Ian are very similar." And you go, "No, we're not. How dare you?" But I saw what was happening to Graham, and as much as I didn't like him, and he had some right pops at me when I started writing for The Spectator and for Spiked and stuff like that in England. Like, he'd a few really nasty digs, and I had a few really nasty digs back, because both of us are quite comfortable in a hostile environment. You know, that's the way we are as blokes.
Yeah.
But I saw what was happening to him, and because we had a lot of mutual friends, because we came up through the same ranks together. Although I would like to point out he is 6 years older than I am, just for the record. But I saw these friends turn on him. And a mutual friend of ours died in fairly tragic circumstances. And at the funeral, and at the afters of the funeral, all of our mutual friends were there, because this was a guy that we'd worked with and we'd hung out with. And everybody was saying, now these were people who were licking up to Graham for years, when Graham was riding high with Father Ted and all, and, you know, winning BAFTAs and things. These were people who wanted to, you know, be in Graham's orbit. And they were all saying what a terrible person Graham was. And they were all saying it to me because they knew that me and Graham didn't get on. Like, the enmity between the two of us was quite well known at that stage. And I just thought, this is wrong. This is absolutely awful. I mean, you know, a year ago, these people were taking selfies with him. You know, and who takes selfies with a bloke you've known for 20 years? But they wanted to bask in his sunlight. And whereas my take was like, Graham's a dick, I don't care, you know. But I saw that, and there was something in that really kind of worried me, Mario.
Yeah.
You know,
well, there was a huge herd thing going on.
And I just thought, right, we've never got on. But this is wrong. This is wrong, you know, and people then were turning on me, saying, but the two of you hate each other. Why are you the one defending him? Mm-hmm. And I was like, well, it's the principle, not the person. Mm-hmm. You know, and so then I did a podcast with Spiked, you know, the English, because I write for Spiked. I write for Spiked and The Spectator in England. Yeah. And I get more freedom with them than I do with Irish publications, interesting enough. But so during the Spiked podcast with Brendan O'Neill, I spoke about Graham, and I defended Graham, and I said that what had happened to him has been genuinely appalling, and it should be, you know, quite terrifying for anybody, even, like, you know, all of Graham's mates over here turned on him, and the vast majority of them in London, all of his arty friends, and all of the comedians and stuff like that, they all turned on him. And
what about Arthur?
That relationship is between them.
Okay.
You know, I've never really asked, to be honest with you, you know, and that's not my place to say. But I saw people who used to boast about being friends with Graham deny it, and it was like the Crucible or something, you know.
It definitely was.
It was the worst of human nature, and I just thought, like, but funny enough, he got in touch with me, and this is how we got back in contact. Was that I defended him on the Spiked podcast, and I said to Brendan O'Neill, who hosts it, I said, look, for the record, me and Graham hate each other.
Yeah.
But what has happened to that man is an absolute abomination.
Yeah.
And it's a stain on the character of everybody involved. And I said, I can't stand the guy, and he can't stand me. But I will stand up for his right to say whatever he wants. And Graham kind of appreciated that because he felt that he was completely alone in Ireland, that everybody had turned their back on him. Excuse me. And he
In Ireland?
Yeah.
Yep. And in England.
And in England.
Yeah.
But he was saying, because with me in the Irish context, and he was saying how ironic that the guy that hated him the most was the only one who defended him.
Yeah. Oh, well, I think you come from that place where you feel, as you said, comfortable in a hostile environment, and you could almost identify with him. I remember I followed the whole thing myself a bit online, and so before he got cancelled online, he got taken off the platform, and then he was reintroduced onto the platform. And I remember thinking, pretty much the same as yourself, right? The Crucible and all that. But also I remember thinking how viscerally objectionable he was in tweets at people who he disagreed with. So his motto was, go in first, go in hard, go in almost to kill with your statement. In other words, he, as you said, he showed zero nuance. So he would go, for example, somebody would say something maybe critical, and he would go, blah, 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 this guy is a cunt, needs to be wiped out, taken outside, shot through the face.
Well, the thing is, he admits that, right? He doesn't justify it. He doesn't excuse it. And I'm not his counsellor, his advocate. It's not for me to defend him. But I mean, I brought that up with him, you know?
Yeah, what do you say?
And he was like Captain Council back in the day, you know, and he apologised profusely. He said he got it really wrong. And he said there's two Graham Linehans. There's the pre-2019 Graham Linehan, and then there's the post-2019 Graham Linehan. And he immediately puts his hands up and he goes, yeah, I was an asshole, you know? And that is something that I wouldn't have expected necessarily to be coming from Mr. Linehan. But no, he's been through the ringer.
He has, yeah. And has, you know, it's again this thing. We'll come to it later with free speech, maybe. So he's an example of one of the guests that you have on. You said to me you're going to have Conor McGregor on.
Yes, we were hoping to get Conor on. I know that his coach, John Cavan, is coming on. And obviously I want Conor on. And I'm from Crumlin. I'm from not far away from where he is.
Okay.
And so I probably understand Conor and his background a bit better than some of the kind of middle class journalists,
right?
Who just see him as this weird, sort of strange creature, you know. Whereas I grew up with lads like Conor.
Yeah,
I know lads like Conor. I've never met Conor, but I know Conor.
Right,
if you know what I mean.
Yep.
You know, and so I mean, I remember there's a perfect example of how the media misunderstand people like Conor McGregor. And I'm not saying I agree with everything he says. I'm not saying I agree with anything.
No, I'm interested in your point, how they misunderstand him. Yeah.
But I remember that when the Crumlin gang feud, so I know I'm from Kildare Road in Crumlin, right? Yeah. And when the Crumlin gang feud started, I think it was after this second or third shooting, and then there was a guy whacked outside the Abercababra in the Crumlin shopping centre. And so the Indo, I was working in the Indo, and I was sitting at my desk, and they were sending the chief features writer up. It was a very grand lady. Went to all the right dinner parties, knew all the right politicians. And they sent her up to Crumlin to get some colour, you know, because she insisted on getting the cover every Saturday and stuff. And I was sitting there, I wasn't that long in the Indo, and I was kind of going, well, I'm actually from there. I know some of the people involved, but it wasn't my place to kind of say, well, actually, you know, I'm the bloke on the ground here. So this lady lives in a very leafy part of Dublin 4. She went up to Crumlin for the first time. And she came back a few hours later, and she was white. Right? It was like she'd been sent to the projects in Baltimore, right, or the Banlieue or something. And she came out with this classic line that, my God, it's no wonder they're shooting each other. How do they live like this?
Right. Okay. Yeah.
And I erupted, right? And which wasn't really a clever thing to do when I was a young fella and I was only in there a couple of weeks. But I just went, fuck this. You know, I'm not having this. I mean, I haven't a clue what you're talking about. I said, I'm from there. I'm from 389 Kildare Road. And how dare you talk about how do they live like this? It's no wonder they're shooting each other. You know, and I said, Crumlin's the most solid area you can come from, and these tow rags are dragging the reputation. Now, Crumlin was always a rough part, you know what I mean? You'd learn how to look after yourself. But what I remember with that was that she looked at me, and she always then thought I was just a thug who was probably walking around with a gun in my back or something, you know. And I really kind of learned the and I know this is kind of a segue, but there's a huge class distinction in the media in Ireland. Huge. And there were times where I never gave a toss about class. You know what I mean? I was just a bright working class kid who was into his music and into writing. You know what I mean? But I wasn't, you know, Wolfie Smith. Do you remember Citizen Kane, the sitcom from when we were kids? The guy, you know, power to the people. I was never like that. I didn't care one way or the other. You know what I mean? And but the more I found myself dealing with people like that, it was like, my God, it's no wonder they're shooting each other just because they live on Captain's Road or just because they live in Kildare Road. Yep. How dare you? How dare you? And there were the nodding dogs in the inn there were sitting around going, oh, yes, absolutely. Absolutely. What can you expect? And in a weird way, that was a kind of, I'd always ignored class. I'd never had anything to do with it. I always thought it was a very reductive kind of thing, you know. I don't give a toss what class you're from. I don't care where you went to school. I don't care where you live. You know what I mean? It didn't bother me. But for some strange reason, when she said that, it's no wonder they're shooting each other when they have to live like that. It woke something in me. This sort of dormant working class warrior kind of thing.
Yep.
That I never realised I had. Mm-hmm. And because I thought all that shit was just nonsense, you know, and I became quite bullish after that. And there was something in it strangely kind of triggered me. And coincidentally or not, I don't know, I started actually hanging out back more in Crumlin then, you know, going down to the Four Roads for a few pints with old mates and stuff, you know, and things like that. And I just, you see, this is something that's really helped me in the media, I think, is that I've always felt like an outsider. I didn't go to college, right? So I don't have stories with other journalists about, oh, do you remember such and such a lecturer? Or, well, you know, because there's only 2 journalism colleges or whatever. I bluffed my way into hot press when I was 15 by inventing a school magazine. So I could interview Niall Stokes for a non-existent school magazine. And Niall being the editor of Hot Press. And then, of course, in typical me fashion, I hadn't exactly thought this through. So then after I did the interview, he said, oh, I'd love to see a copy of it. So then I had to go back and start a school bloody magazine so I could give him something to show, right? So it was an early version of fake it until you make it. But I never, and then looking enough, he kind of took a shine to me. And I kind of started getting my first pieces in Hot Press then from about the age of 16 or so. And although I was always convinced that was because I was playing a lot of football at the time, and they're a day at a football team.
Yeah.
But to be eligible, pretty much I had to have a published piece, and so they really needed a fit 16-year-old who was a good footballer. So it was like, give him a couple of reviews. But that was how you could get into the business back then. You didn't need to go to college. You know, you didn't need to get your whatever cert or degree in journalism, whatever, you know.
And you kind of think it's ring fenced now. It's
very much ring fenced
off.
Yeah, I mean, I got in through chutzpah.
Yep.
Basically, right? And
almost how one should get into journalism or something.
Well, it kind of, it's an advantage in our game.
Yeah, because
you know, you need a neck like a jockey's proverbial.
That's what you're going to be doing with it in the future.
But it's one of the things that I've noticed is that down the years, a lot of the kids that I've seen coming through, they all tend to be very nice. don't get me wrong. I mean, they're not like arrogant college brats or anything. They're all very nice. But there's a slight sense of identikit about them, you know, and you could nearly tell which lecturers that they had because their views will be quite similar. And I was lucky because when I was coming up, journalism was never seen as a profession. It was a trade. And it was a somewhat dishonourable trade, you know, and it was seen as being a trade for malcontents.
Bowsies.
And alcos, you know, and
Troublemakers,
yeah. As it should be. And I still, maybe I'm blowing smoke up my own arse, but I still like to see myself as a bowsie, a troublemaker, you know. And it's my job to, you know, to afflict the comfortable, you know.
Two things just come up when you talked about that. One was Crumlin, right? And because I just did a recent interview with Fintan O'Toole.
Oh, yeah.
He's from Crumlin.
Yeah, he is.
But, you know, probably wouldn't see, you guys probably wouldn't see eye to eye on a lot of subjects.
No, we wouldn't.
But coming from the same working class background. And the other one was just getting back to McGregor a minute ago. I just be devil's advocate for a minute about the class assertion that you made there. The woman you talked about is almost a cliche. It's like that kind of...
You should read her stuff and then you'd see exactly a cliche.
It's almost like a snob you'd see in My Left Foot or something, where Dublin is, you know, this woman, this Christy Brown, and sort of goes, what would you be doing with the cripple?
Yeah, she's not a very bright person.
No, right. But I think that to say that there's a class element in Conor thing is, you know, that can be tested. I mean, his early days, for example, in the media were glorious, fated, wonderful. Everywhere he went, put forward, you know, made as a kind of an example of what, you know, you can be in your life. And for me, it's his actions which have alienated him. Not only his criminal actions, but worse, his insufferable cruelty, his casual cruelty, which I think is, you know, not to highlight something, but to highlight also this thing that a lot of people hate about Republicans in the United States as well. The administration. It's this kind of offhand cruelty that they seem to be interested. Casual cruelty. So I think it was. I'd test you on the Conor McGregor thing. I'd say that he was loved by the media, but it was his own actions which have made him derided, hated.
Yeah, I would pretty much agree with you on most of that, you know. But I do think there is a large degree of snobbery. I would disagree with you that he was loved by the media. There was always, a class...
patronising
undercurrent, you know, and I think he's certainly done himself no favours. And
but you're happy to have him on your podcast? Yeah,
because the thing is, I've never met Conor, but I know him because I know people like him. I know people from his road, a group of people from his road, right? Conor could have easily been a neighbour of mine, right? So I don't look at him as some weird, unique specimen that came out of the ether, you know. I grew up with lads like Conor, you know. I get him. And I don't agree with him on pretty much anything, you know. Whereas a lot of the journalists, excuse me, a lot of the journalists who write about him, they don't understand him. They don't understand where he's coming from. They don't understand his background. Excuse me. They don't understand the need he has to show off the bling, to go, see this watch costs 15 grand.
I get that.
I get it. I don't have it myself.
No, either do I, but I totally get it.
But I get it, right? So I'd be the last person to look down on McGregor as a snob because I come from the same background, you know, and that's why I found interesting about him. And also because if me and Conor were in one of the pubs in Crumlin and he started, I'd just be like, Jesus, Conor, will you give it a rest? You know what I mean? Because we all knew lads like that. You know, you get down to the Four Roads or you get down to the Stone Boat and there's a bloke and he's giving it, you know, and everybody goes, oh, Jesus, will you just give it a rest? You know? So I think I probably, now I'm saying this before I've actually spoken to the lad, but I know his background because I'm from his background. And I know people who know him, you know, and I think he's in grave danger of, he could have carved out a remarkable legacy.
Yeah.
And I think he's in grave danger of, quite frankly, just throwing it all away.
Yeah, exactly. As a lot of us say, there was a kind of a Muhammad Ali inspirational figure type person potentially emerging there before everything went pear-shaped. I'll leave it there on that. And your podcast is the state of us, and hopefully you'll be interesting to hear that thing with Conor McGregor. Jans, you spoke very eloquently actually about why you became a journalist, and that was nice. Just a straight question for you here. Like, as an opinion writer in Ireland, in the mainstream, which you are, do you think that RTE and the mainstream media in general, I suppose I mean the broadsheets, the main tabloids and news talk, Today FM, for what little we do here, and Today FM and RTE, do you think they represent a fair and full range of opinions that representing Ireland?
No, would be my honest answer. But a qualified no. I think some of the work that's done in the Irish media is far superior to some of the work that's done in the British media, right? But I would be very critical of how a lot of the Irish media approaches things, because I say we because I'm part of it, whether I like it or not, and I do like it. I love my job. I love being a journalist. This is the thing. You get a lot of hacks and they go, oh, Jesus, deadlines or whatever. I love deadlines. I love the pressure. I love coming up with headlines. I love the rows. I love the energy of being in a newsroom. I get off in it. Like, you know.
And you are in a newsroom. You don't.
Well, I'm not anymore because of lockdown and all that kind of stuff. But like, you know, but I used to love that. I used to love the rows, and I used to love the adrenaline.
Yeah, the gossip.
And the gossip. I mean, you know, journalists, we're professional gossips, you know. And like, when it comes to journalism, what I always used to say was that it wasn't what I did, it was who I was.
Okay.
It was an all-consuming kind of thing. Like, I'm an addict for journalism. I love it, absolutely. It drives, but you know, she's a cruel mistress, and it drives you mad. But what I find with one of the problems I have with Irish journalism now is that it's been taken over very much by a managerial class.
Yeah.
And there's a sense of we're doing this for the greater good. And it's a lot of people, without even realising it, I think, they tend to look on the audience as customers who need to be tutored in the ways of righteousness.
Yeah, okay. I'll just stop you there for a minute, because I feel the same about some of this from a creative point of view. And you said managerial class, right? So one of my problems about RTE, right, I'll really circle back to what you're saying.
Yeah.
Is that there's too many guys called Noel on 110 grand a year. So there's about 100 guys in there called Noel on 110 grand a year. None of them do any creative. None of them create anything, do any content. They all just kind of defer, pass the ball, make decisions based on what they think. But what they do most crucially is they second guess what people want to hear to try and give them what they want. They don't know, or they don't have a drive or a passion to say something or have people say something that they believe they want to say. They want to only hear things or have things heard which they think will go down well in this mythical place called Middle Ireland.
Yep.
Right? Similarly with comedy, which I come from, they go, what? Noel? Yes, Noel. What do you think the young people want now? Apparently there's a lot of stuff about, apparently like there's the rural. We need to cater for the rural. Are you in the rural? No. I live in Donnybrook, Dublin 4. But were you in the rural? No, I live in Clontarf. Right, okay. So what's rural? Them outside. We need to cater for them. Them, right. Why don't we just put on fellas with the fucking bogman accent? It doesn't matter what they do. And that'll satisfy the rural. So they try to tick boxes like that, going, going to try and second guess what we think you want. They're not program makers, they're managers.
Yeah.
And that is a problem. And that's exactly what you were responding to as well. So I'm asking you about opinions, and you're saying There's a managerial class taking over the dissemination of opinions. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and the thing about it is, if you end up in that kind of managerial class, whether it's in broadcasting or whether it's in print or whether it's in radio, anything to do with media, they tend to be very safe and very boring and very dull people. That's why they're good at what they do. Because the likes of you or me would never be allowed into that managerial class because we just end up causing ructions. So these are people who go along to get along. They're very risk averse. And these are not ideas people. You know, and if you come up with 10 ideas and 9 of them are bad, but one of them is brilliant, well, then you're an ideas person. That's the way it goes. And I've seen it in various different places that I work in where the people in charge wouldn't have an idea if I come up and smack them in the face. But they're very good at playing the system. And what I found was that I'd go into editorial conferences and I'd be fizzing with 15 different ideas. And I could see some of the senior executives or whatever, and they'd kind of be rolling their eyes. And they go, oh, Jesus, he's off again.
Yeah.
And I'm like, because here's the thing, and you have it, and I have it. Well, I presume you have it. You know, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I know I have it, and it's not necessarily something that might come across from whatever little public persona I have, but I'm a romantic. I'm old school.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very romantic about journalism. I still think I can change the world.
Mm-hmm.
I still think we can change the world, right? I think comedy can change the world. Bill Hicks changed my life, right? The night I saw Bill Hicks in the Tivoli changed my life. One man changed my life. And we're talking about, when we talk about the managerial class, and it's not a mythical managerial class. It's not one of these things that exists only in the heads of creatives. I've been butting heads with these pricks for 25 years. These guys never had a comedian who changed their life. These guys never had an original thought in their life. These guys woke up in the morning and went, how do I not get sacked today?
Yeah, and they're good at that.
And they're good at that.
Yeah.
And the thing is
this part of the sly Slevene culture that's difficult to navigate that you described? There was a quote from you.
Yes.
Is this what you're talking to?
Yeah.
Small country, parochial, a lot of intelligent people, well-educated people who are good at what they do, but it creates a kind of a sly Schlevenism, which people are very good at flitting in and out of things without kind of
and I could never do that. I just...
Yeah, you head on.
I don't have... And it's a weakness of mine, I suppose, not of theirs, but I don't have the mental subtlety to navigate those shallows.
I know what you mean.
You know?
What is it then, back to my question about RTE, let's say. Call it RTE in the mainstream media. Call it RTE in the mainstream, call it News Talk RTE in the mainstream media and TV and radio and broadsheets. What kind of stuff do you think at the moment or in the past 2 or 3 years is kind of a difficult thing for somebody like you to say and to be kind of invited back on next week for more of that, please? What do you think?
Ooh, in terms of the topics that I would have lost work over writing about, kind of.
Yeah,
thing,
you can say that if you want. In other words, firm up your point by examples?
Well, Israel.
All right, let's go for it.
I'm a proud and unashamed supporter of the state of Israel.
Right.
I make no apologies.
Right.
And anybody who's ever been there and then, most importantly, been to the surrounding countries will see the difference, right? That is not a popular position to hold.
No, it's not.
In the Irish media.
No, it's not.
And the thing is, I don't care.
Well, that's not important either.
You know,
what's important is that are you allowed on to talk about that?
No.
How do you know?
Because I've been told.
But reliably?
By the producers.
What have you been told?
Well, I have to be careful that I don't want to land on you.
Don't incriminate anybody. Just say, well, like what have you been told? Let's say I'm producer X. What am I saying to you?
leave out the Israeli stuff.
Why?
Because they had something on about that last night.
Yeah, 'cause that's a way of them saying we'll get into trouble.
Yeah.
And is that because they'll get into trouble with? Was that? Why? Yeah.
No, it's because I'll win the argument. And they don't want a pro-Israeli person to win the argument. But every argument I've ever had with an anti-Israeli person, anti-Israeli Irish person, I've won those arguments comprehensively for the simple reason that the facts are on my side and I'm not relying on opinion, I'm relying on fact. And these are people who tend to have sort of a comic book interpretation of what the Middle East is. And it's a very Manichaean, black and white. Israel bad, poor, oppressed, downtrodden, brown skin, Muslim lads, good. And it's a very Orientalist view of the Middle East, and it's a really simplistic view that if you're into kind of simplistic views, it's a very comforting one. And in this country in particular, we have a long and very inglorious history of Catholic anti-Semitism. You look at the pogrom in Limerick, early 20th century and stuff. Yeah. And that was sort of, it was a Father Cray, I think was the name of the guy who organised that. But we've swapped, as we got, this is the thing I find fascinating about it, is that we swapped Catholic anti-Semitism. We got rid of the Catholic Church as the dominant culture in this country, but we retained the general sense of anti-Semitism. And I mean, I remember I was at the memorial service for October 7th, the first anniversary, in the synagogue in Terranure, which was an unbelievably moving experience. And I felt very blessed to have been invited as a non-Jewish person, because I would have, if I was Jewish, I would have said no non-Jews. This is ours, you know. So I was surprised to be invited, to be perfectly frank. Right. And myself and my wife were extremely honoured. Right. And there was no government representative. There was no aide de camp. Right. This is the first anniversary of the biggest massacre of Jews since the Holocaust. And the government didn't send a person.
Would you thought it would have been appropriate for the government to send a person?
Yeah. Of course it would. And one of the things that really kind of broke my heart about that was that I was talking to some of the Jewish people there, and I'm always, even though they don't mind it, I'm always very uncomfortable referring to the Jews. It almost seems like it's automatically pejorative.
It does,
So I always say Jewish people, because I'm more comfortable with that.
Yeah.
But the some of the Jewish people that I know that I was talking to at it, including a Holocaust survivor. And what I found really sad was that I was livid that there was no official representation.
Okay.
Right? I was absolutely furious. And for God's sake, when a friend of mine, George Byrne, the journalist, he was best man at my wedding and stuff, and he died about 10 years ago. But at his funeral, Michael D. Higgins sent his aide de camp. Right? And which was a nice gesture. And then we have this memorial service for all those thousands of Jews who had been killed and kidnapped, and there was no official representative. Yeah. And they weren't surprised. And I just, because I was furious, and they're going, we weren't expecting. Yeah. We weren't expecting. And I thought, my God, what is wrong with this country? But even when you think about it, I live in Terranure, right? And when I was growing up in Crumlin, Terranure, and Crumlin's not that far from Terranure, as the crow flies. But when I was growing up in Crumlin, Terranure was known as Jewtown, right? And they had a football team then. There was a Jewish football team called Maccabi, and they weren't that far outside Terranure. It was sort of halfway between Terranure and Kimmage. And we drew them in a cup, and they weren't very good in fairness, but we drew them in a cup match, and I was not playing in a fairly decent team, and like we hammered them, but it was all like beat the Jews, and I was only under 14. I was going, where's this coming from? Right. Like even then,
well, where was it coming from? And you'd have to sort of, I don't know. I mean, when you're telling the story, it even two things to say about that story. One is, I mean, take any society in the world, America or Ireland or England, and you're going to get, the pejoratives called for every minority that exists. Do you know what I mean? And it's just the way people. It's just the way.
Yeah, but there's a certain
the down in Chinatown, the Japs, the Itais, this disgusting Irish, the Jews.
Yeah, I you see, the thing about it is, I agree with you on that. Yeah, I mean, there's no denying that. But there's a degree of exceptionalism
about Jewish people,
and I think that comes from envy. Because they tend to be quite successful in business, because they have to work harder than everybody else. Traditionally in Ireland, a lot of them had been, say, working as moneylenders and things.
Correct, I understood.
And pawn
successful
shops.
People, but does it come from a deep-seated doctrinaire, emblazoned notion through? You could tell, please, because I'm out of my pay grade here a little bit, so maybe we both are. But I suspect you know a little bit more. Is there something deeply ingrained in Catholics, for example, that is almost, if not directly said, then subtly pointed out constantly through their catechism and through their teaching, that the Jews killed Jesus?
Yeah.
And so that's the cardinal sin. So it's the Jews that did it.
Well, you see, this is
so
it.
That's part of it. So you said envy. Yes, it's partly that. Not only did the Jews kill Jesus, but they ended up as the moneylenders as well.
Yeah. And it's incredible today, if you look at some of the cartoons The Guardian in particular, since October the 7th. There's one cartoonist for The Guardian, and his representation of Jewish leaders and Jewish people, they could have come from Der Stürmer, the Nazi propaganda rag in the 40s. Genuinely, they really could. And you're kind of going, and you kind of go, Jesus, this stuff is never that far away.
Yeah.
And that, like, what really kills me is that quite a few of the Jewish people that I know, they're bugging out. They're gone. Right? They're out of here. And for the first time in their life, since October the 7th, there was always a slight undercurrent. I'll give you a very quick example. The Jewish Independence Day, they always have, the Israeli embassy always hosts a party. And there was one year, a few years ago, it was down in the Berkeley Court. And there were a couple of hundred protesters outside. Now, this is a decade before October the 7th, right? There was no conflict going on. I think there was a ceasefire going between Hamas and Israel at the time. So there was no, technically speaking, there was no static between the two. And I was walking down to it with an Israeli friend of mine who was going out with a mate of mine that I'd introduced when I brought him over to Israel. And she'd never been to Ireland before. The weather was lovely, and she was walking, we were walking behind two elderly Holocaust survivors, as it turns out, and the little road as you go down to the Berkeley. And the protesters saw the two obviously elderly Jews and started going, as in the gas, right? And the elderly couple, they walked on. They'd obviously, they've been through this before. It's water off a duck's back. But Liat, my Israeli friend, she burst into tears. And my mate, who she'd gone out with, who I'd gone over to Israel with, the police basically had to stop him going in and smacking heads, and she spent pretty much the night, or most of the night, in the corner crying. She'd lost grandparents, great-grandparents in the Holocaust, and to come to Ireland, which she thought was a friendly country. And this is what she was exposed to. And I remember I was talking to the Israeli ambassador at the time, and I said, "You see that girl over there?" I said, "She's from Tel Aviv. And you know why she's crying?" And I told him, and he was going, "Oh my God." And he went over to her, and he was going, "Not all Irish are like this." So you kind of had this weird situation where there was an Israeli ambassador consoling a girl from Israel, and he was trying to tell her that not all Irish make gas noises when they see a Jew. And that's gone back a long time. And you look at the portrayal of the conflict in the media, and it's so unbelievably one-sided. And you get these fatuous comparisons between, Ireland and England and the Palestinians and Israel and stuff like that. And it's just so historically wrong. And it's just so stupid. And it is, not everybody not every disagreement with Israel is anti-Semitism. And I think this is a mistake the Israeli government often make. And it's something that when we still had the embassy, I used to talk to them and I say, "Will you stop saying anti-Semitism?"
Yeah.
Right. It's just.
Yeah, this is one of the obvious kind of little canards I was obviously going to get in with you. Having said everything you've said and having got your point across and having made the interesting observation that in your opinion, it is unbelievably one-sided, and that our, for example, government seem to be taking one side.
Oh, absolutely. But the thing is, they're proud of that.
Having said that, is it not possible and indeed right to expect to be able to criticise Israel and not be accused of being anti-Semitic?
Absolutely.
And more to the point, is it not right that you can criticise, let's separate Israel from somebody like Benjamin Netanyahu, who to the eyes of like a lot of people would seem to be a psychopathic warmonger who is pretty much in it just to stay in power.
Netanyahu's a soldier.
I know he was a soldier.
The thing is, you have to, Netanyahu is not popular with young Israelis. He's despised by liberal Israelis. And this is the thing that, if you put two Israelis into a room together, you get three different arguments.
Okay.
They're a very disputatious country, Israeli media is fascinating, like the papers. I mean, they just... I've been to Shabbos dinner and
You're saying it's interestingly diverse?
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
I wouldn't have known that.
No, it really is. And if you look at, say, Haaretz to the Jerusalem Post, they're not just two papers, they're from two different countries, they're from two different mindsets. There's actually a much greater plurality of opinion in Israeli media than there is in Irish media, right? And the thing is, they love an argument. And like, as I said, I've been to Shabbos dinners in Tel Aviv, and it's just 5 or 6 courses of people arguing, right? And it's fantastic, you know what I mean? But the thing with Netanyahu is that he is despised by a lot of Israelis. And it is true that basically as soon as he's gone from power, he's looking at corruption charges. And his wife as well, right. which is important. Yep. And it's the reason why his son hasn't come back to fight. His son is in America, right? Because he knows that basically, if once the son goes back to Israel, he's not getting back out again. Okay. Fine. So be it. It's a democratic state. Let them work this out. Like, I'm not saying that Israel is some Shangri-La, has all the problems that a democratic state has. But I do find it odd the way the Irish have so blindly got behind a Palestinian cause. And I'll give you
Can you tell me why you think that is? Maybe have we touched on it already, or why have the Irish? Why do you think then that the Irish establishment has got so squarely behind the Palestinian?
It's a misplaced appropriation of the Irish struggle against England, right? They analogize, and they see the Palestinians as analogous to Ireland, and that in this scenario, in this narrative, Israel are the Brits. So they feel a natural sympathy for the Palestinians. And the problem with that is, and there is a degree of anti-Semitism in it as well, but I wouldn't put that by any means as the main factor. Some of the people I know genuinely, the mask will slip and they don't talk about Israelis, they talk about the Jews, and you can see it coming out. That's, but you can park that. I'm talking about the ordinary kind of opponent of Israel who means well, and they're not anti-Semitic in the least. But they incorrectly see a parallel between the Palestinians and the Israelis and the Irish and the English.
Yeah.
And it's just one that simply historically doesn't turn up. But I remember, like, when Michael Collins was on the run, he actually hid, and the British occupying forces here were searching for him. It was amongst the Jews that gave him shelter.
Yeah.
And this is what breaks my heart. And it does. I find it an absolute tragedy that the left have managed to pollute this over the last 40 or 50 years. There was always a great relationship between the Jews and the Irish. Always. And now it's been poisoned by politicians, cynical politicians, and the Irish left. And it's this thing that Israel is the sort of European colonialist oppressor. Israel's been there for 3,000 years. And the poor Palestinians are this oppressed minority. Well, I'll tell you one thing. I saw the video of October the 7th, right? I saw what those savages did, right? They recorded themselves raping, killing, right? And disfiguring in the most graphic way. And the reason I saw it, and the reason why it's all on camera, is because they recorded on their own GoPro stuff to send back to their families, to boast. And I'm looking at it and I'm going, anybody who saw that would lose any shred of decency. And I had a row with an Israeli official, and I went, make this available. Let people see, And interestingly enough, they offered the Dáil a screening. Dáil turned it down. Mm-hmm. They offered to put on a special screening in the Dáil for any TD or any senator who wanted to go and see it. And Mario, this is a postcard from hell, right? And that they recorded themselves to laugh about and to boast about. So the Israelis, they were getting major flack from the Irish politicians. And they said, tell you what, we'll bring a copy down. You have a screening room in the Dáil. Any TD, any senator wants to come in. And they got a blunt reply back on, that won't be necessary, thank you very much.
Right.
That's what they're up against, right? And as I said, I don't defend them 100%. I don't defend anybody 100% because then you become a fanatic. But you kind of, when you take a step back and you look at this, and particularly in Ireland, the narrative, it's just absurd. Like, when I criticise the Israeli government, at least I know why I'm criticising them. And I know what better actions they take and why there'd be, say, more left-wing members in the Knesset who are criticising the government. But these people, they just criticise because it's Israel bad, Muslim good. And it's just, I just see it and you kind of go, not only are you people grown adults, but you're politicians or you're journalists.
Ian, you said you were going to give me some information about Graham Lennon. You said you had a scoop for me.
Well, basically, as people might know, the Father Ted the musical was cancelled.
Yeah.
It was very, very eagerly anticipated. And will I tell you a bit of the story of it?
As in the story of what?
Of the musical. What happens?
The story of the musical or the story behind the musical?
No, I'll tell you the story. The plot.
Oh, yeah. So what happens? Did Ted go to America?
No.
No.
Jack becomes Pope.
Yeah, I'd had heard that, yeah.
Right. Ardle writes Vatican III. And Ted... And one of the things in Vatican III that Ardle does is that priests are allowed to marry. So Ted marries Polly Clark. Do you remember the romance novelist?
Oh, the Claire.
Yeah.
Claire Grogan.
No, it was the older one. It was the.
Yeah.
But she was the one that Ted fell in love with in the show. So
yes,
she comes back.
I remember her.
And and Jack has given up drinking. So
and his Pope.
And he's the nicest man in Ireland and the nicest man in Christendom.
Right.
And he drives around in his Pope mobile and says hello to everybody. And he becomes not Jack, but Frank Kelly. You know, and do you remember Frank? Very theatrical. And
Frank was very well spoken. And
yeah. So that's Pope Jack, right? And it's wonderful, right? And as Graham was saying to me on my show, he said, like, it would have been a wonderful thing, you know. And even there's a lovely moment.
Did he write it with Arthur?
Yeah.
Yeah, wow.
And they'd Neil Hannon and Paul Wonderful doing the music.
Yeah.
And then all this trans shit started. And Hat-Trick.
I'd read something about that. They wanted to buy him out and stuff.
Yeah. And so he stood his ground, which he... Fair play to him, but I still think it was the wrong call. But, you know, that's Graham. He's a stubborn bugger. But, so it's in sort of permanent abeyance.
Yeah.
But there's a guy who's going to be coming onto the show who he was onto me through his people. He'd heard this. And he's talking about... I don't go into too many details because I don't want to scupper it. But he's talking about... And he's an extremely wealthy man. He's talking about getting in touch with Hat-Trick and buying the rights.
Okay. And
bringing it to the West End.
Wow.
And bringing it to New York.
Wow, so possible.
And making Graham the director.
Wow.
So if that could happen, I can die happy going, well, I've done one good thing in my life. You know?
Wow. Wow, the man who who facilitated Father Ted being put back together.
And
again.
when I was saying it to Graham, Graham said, Jesus, if he does that, he can play Ted himself. I don't give a shit. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But
interesting.
Yeah, no, so it looks like there is kind of light at the end of the tunnel. And the thing is, it's not benefiting anybody. Nobody's getting any royalties. Hat-Trick aren't getting anything.
Yeah.
All this has done is cost Hat-Trick at the production company, by the way. All this has done is cost Jimmy Mulville and Hat-Trick a lot of money because they've had to pay people off so far.
Yeah.
Right? This is something that could be making a fortune in the West End. And people forget as well that Ted won quite a few international Emmys. It's a big, it's a big audience in New York. So they were hoping at one stage to get over into sort of Broadway and stuff, right? And it's a musical as well. You see, Neil Hannon wrote the music. Yeah. Now, like, I mean, this isn't, this is Graham's story to tell, and you should maybe get Graham on at some stage because it's fascinating about it. But it's amazing the appetite that's still there. People really want to see it, and
well, it's never gone away.
It's never gone away.
No,
and people want it to go away. No,
it's never going to go away because it's always on and repeated.
Oh yeah,
but it's also sitcom perfection. There's a kind of a perfection. As Graham loves structure. Graham loves the structure of sitcoms. You'd often hear him talking about Only Fools and Horses, Del Boy and Rodney, and things, similar structures to Father Ted.
Bilko. Bilko. You see, there's
there's families. Families.
There's a template.
Family. Yeah. It's family. Like Father Ted was a family.
Yeah.
And so Graham was well into the family, the structure of things. So yeah,
Arthur was the madness.
Arthur was you see, when you watch Toast of London, right, and you
brilliant.
hear like a person's name like Clem Fandango, That's the madness.
Yeah.
You go, where did you come up with that name?
Yeah.
You know, so that's the madness. And also Arthur's background with the priests. You know, and all that sort of stuff. But anyway, listen, brilliant, great story. We've got to go. Ian, the podcast is called The State of Us, and I really look forward to actually now tuning in. I'll subscribe.
Excellent.
And maybe people who subscribe to the Mario Rosenstock podcast, do yourself a favour and subscribe to Ian's as well.
Thank you very much for having me on.
And maybe I'll have you on again not too far away, because we've got to talk about America.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's do it.
And my thanks to Ian O'Doherty for coming in and talking to me on the podcast, and good luck to him with The State of Us. I'll definitely be keeping abreast of what's going on there. My thanks, of course, to you, and my thanks to my sponsor, deluxebathrooms.ie. The Summer Sizzler sale is on until June 29th. I'll see you same time, same place next week, folks. Goodbye.